right now, if you went to the website and you're like, hey, I want to try one of these arrows, I want to see what's going on. It's pretty simple. Everyone should know this about their setup. But right now, with how this custom builder is on the website, you go in, you select if you want a dozen or half dozen. Go in, you put in your draw weight, go put in draw length, put in your point weight, and then the percentage of let off, because that's going to change what type of arrow or spine you might need. And then you get to pick between two different inserts. There's aluminum T6 aluminum insert and a brass insert as well. Go in, you can pick the S Fire Nock or the Boning Blazer Nock. And then the beauty of this too, buying custom arrows. Cameron, how long did it take you to get your custom arrows last year?
Oh man, it was couple months, almost 2.5 months when I went through the e-commerce custom arrow builder.
So 2 months. The default on our website is ships within 5 business days. And if you want to get expedited build process and everything else, you can get them in 2 to 3 business days, or build time, and then next business day. So just to clarify, that is build time. They are built within 5 business days, and then they will ship. So depending where you're at in the country, they'll get them pretty fast. Like really, if you order them on a Monday, you should have them by potentially early next week. So that's fast.
Lights,
camera,
follow the trail.
ready to shoot.
If you know where a deer's bedding and you know where he's eating, that deer should be dead.
Camera!
If you're passive on a deer, what you're doing is you're teaching them.
I've got 30 bucks in the Michigan record book. Everyone but one has had at least one previous wound on his body. Some had as many as 4.
The Exodus Podcast.
Your source for all things whitetail.
All right, we're live. And man, this is they're all exciting, but this one's extra exciting. It's been a long time coming in terms of everything. I mean, like you look back at the origins of the company, Exodus Outdoor Gear. There for a while, we were going through an awkward phase of calling ourselves Exodus Trail Cameras, but our website was still Exodus Outdoor Gear. Time to reel back in. Exodus Outdoor Gear is here, and the reason is because we have some exciting announcements. Before we get into that, if you've been paying attention at all in terms of what we've been up to in terms of social, updating the podcast artwork, name, YouTube channel, brand new website, updated logo assets, like the whole gambit for a brand. Like basically we put our old brand book through a shredder. Here we are, updated, fresh, squeaky clean version. But that's all pretty exciting. What do you think about that?
We've been dropping the little tidbits, kind of like little crumbs along the way, leaving a trail. Kudos to anybody that's actually picked up on it. I've gotten a few DMs about like, hey, what are you guys doing here? What are you guys doing? Like, there's got to be something coming. So there have been some people that have recognized kind of the strategic execution of what has happened over the last 30 days, maybe 5 weeks. So kudos to those people. But we're super excited to finally bring this stuff to light. I mean, we've been working on some of this stuff for, 10 months, maybe. Actually, it's probably closing in on 12 months on the arrow side, but like the last 6 weeks, it's been nose to the grindstone, new story video, updating all these assets, kind of going through that or undoing that awkward branding phase that we went through, which really relates to some early mistakes on our part as operators with the brand, making some wrong decisions with boulder bikes and the ozone stuff and losing money and trying to reel it back in and focus on what we knew, focus on what we were good at, and that was trail cameras. So here we are, fast forward 5 years. We've learned from our mistakes. We're kind of going for round 2.
Yeah, well, yeah, maybe round 4 technically, but a real fair shake at a round 2, or I guess solidifying ourselves as an outdoor gear company. Before we get the cat officially out of the bag, new story video. So if you're curious to how Exodus started, what things go on here, and everything else, you get a pretty cool idea of what's going on. New site, hopefully you can navigate that. That's a pretty old website prior, so this is a new one. Very nice, fresh. We have new SD cards on the website as well. What else we got? We got some fresh apparel.
Apparel's dropping. We got some hats, new shirt design coming from Casey.
Yeah, there was a lot of we released the new podcast art and everyone's like, "Oh man, that would make a sweet t-shirt." Well, that design was made for a t-shirt that we doubled as the podcast art. So that is coming. That's here. We have them here on the website. New hats. Hat designs turned out really, really sweet. So yeah, whole new look to Exodus here.
Yeah, get some fresh merch. But it's the moment you guys have all been waiting for here. And I'll tell you this, man, every time I've been sending an email out to partners, I get a chuckle. I'm kind of lame, but it's like this double entendre with every email, because I'm like, we're getting ready to release a new product. We're getting ready to launch a new product. This product we're dropping an arrow line, and it's called the MMT, the Exodus MMT. What does that mean, Cameron? What is the MMT?
The word came to me. We were brainstorming, like, what are we going to call this thing? Within the Deer Gear podcast, I have Dorj Huang from Fire Nock as a co-host a lot. And anytime he starts talking about cause and effect, he uses the word the moment. And you could just replay it in your head, like the moment, the moment, the moment, the moment. And anytime he talks about arrows, he always talks about the moment you do X. So that was my first initial reaction. I was like, we got to call this arrow the moment. You have the moment of truth, the moment of impact, the moment. There's just so many different like double entendres that you can use for the word moment. And they're like, okay, well, SEO, that's really not going to work. You have way too many things to compete with on that. So how do we shorten that down to make it make sense? And we came up with MMT. The part of I'm sure we'll get into more of the arrow specifics, but the goal behind the arrow shafts is maintained momentum, better trajectory. MMT, maintained momentum, bleep out the B, trajectory, better trajectory.
I'm not gonna lie, man. When I think of the moment, my mind goes to like the Eminem song.
Oh yeah,
that's what I go to every time.
For sure.
Like Lose Yourself.
Yeah,
that's where it goes.
It has a similar cadence of Better Pizza, Better People, Papa John's too.
Yeah.
But that's besides the point. Yeah, super excited. So what the hell is the MMT? So it's an arrow line. So like, oh cool, yeah, you guys figured you guys can sell some arrows just like everybody else. Like, where did this birth or where did this start? Because I know it's just not from a year ago.
Yeah, it's not just from a year ago. It's not just a cash grab or like a white label product. It's none of that. We see that in the trail camera space with these flash in the pan companies, whether they're selling on Amazon or they're trying to be D2C or omni. They claim to be D2C, but are omni-channel. That's not our approach. We're not changing who we are as a company. We're not changing our processes, our marketing strategies. We're not deviating from the education. We're just simply going into another product category. Nothing else really changes. Obviously, there's some branding there, but I think when we go back to those early years, we had talks of building a different e-commerce experience in the arrow category. And Matt and I, with the birth of Exodus coming from, I don't want to say this, someone have to bleep that out, but we had the idea of building a custom arrow solution via e-commerce before the e-commerce boom was happening, before all these other custom built arrow companies had a platform. We had talked about doing this back in 2016, 2017. The problem that we found then was, one, we were young, two, we were ignorant, from a standpoint like we didn't really understand what it took to be successful in this space. And three, we were probably way too ambitious, trying to tackle way too many projects. And that result was us trying to launch Boulder bikes before the e-bike craze, failure. It was us exploring ozone products with broken nose scent systems. And we've talked about this in the 7-year podcast, but that arrow brand or that e-commerce custom arrow builder, we were calling it Shawnee Striker. That's back then is where this idea kind of originated from. We never did anything with it because we had already made those mistakes and we needed to reel things in to be successful, focus on what we were good at. That was trail cameras. And obviously, going through those mistakes, we're known as Exodus trail cameras there for, I want to say 4 or 5 years probably.
For sure, yeah. I remember first year going out to the Great American Outdoor Show, asked the question like, all right, Exodus outdoor gear, what else we got cooking? You're like, well, we got the Shawnee Striker. I was like, all right, well, and he explained the process. So that's an awesome idea. Not in love with the name, but besides the point, because at that point, it was the idea of ordering custom arrows online was pretty foreign, honestly. Like you had to go to a pro shop or an archery shop to get your arrow. Consumers are quickly realizing that that's not necessarily the case, and that's not the best place to get the best arrow for you, which is kind of crazy. You'd think when you have FaceTime, that would be the best. But I guarantee we have all bought arrows and felt like, the guy thought I was an idiot. Probably am. He didn't take the point to teach you and explain this is what you need because of what you're doing and all these different things. It's just like, here's a lineup. It's September and everyone needs their arrows by October. And it's just a mad scurry and you just kind of get the shuffle, the runaround. And that's one of the core objectives of what we wanted to go the complete opposite direction.
Yeah, it's kind of mind-boggling, and I think we've all done this, right? We go out and spend $1,000, $1,200, $1,500 on a new bow. We spend X amount of hundreds of dollars on top of the line accessories. So we have $2,000 wrapped up into this bow platform, and then we end up with off-the-shelf arrows from a pro shop guy who really just sold us something because it was based on his opinion, not tailored to what we were shooting. Sometimes that works. Sometimes it doesn't, but with our approach, regardless if it's trail cameras, arrows, whatever we're talking about, like take the variables out of the equation and you'll have a lot better, consistent success with whatever you're doing.
What I'm really excited about here is going in. There's people that geek out about arrows and dive into it and want to become experts. We're taking that out. You don't have to be an expert to get the best arrow for you. Like, we've done the research. We have like, we're building really high quality arrows with strong components, and like taking all the guesswork out of getting the best arrow for your adventures. Like, if you're a whitetail guy and you want the best arrow that you can get for an affordable price, this is it.
Yeah, I know the website's live and whatnot, but like, if someone is listening to this and hasn't gone over and checked out what that looks like walk us through the steps of that data input and what we're spitting out.
So right now, if you went to the website and you're like, hey, I want to try one of these arrows, I want to see what's going on. It's pretty simple. Everyone should know this about their setup. But right now, with how this custom builder is on the website, you go in, you select, you want a dozen or half dozen, go in, you put in your draw weight, go put in your draw length, put in your point weight, and then the percentage of let off, because that's going to change what type of arrow or spine you might need. And then you get to pick between two different inserts. There's aluminum T6 aluminum insert and a brass insert as well. Go in, you can pick the S fire knock or the boning blazer knock. And then the beauty of this too, buying custom arrows. Cameron, how long did it take you to get your custom arrows last year?
Well, man, it was couple months, almost 2.5 months when I went through the e-commerce custom arrow builder.
So 2 months. The default on our website is ships within 5 business days. And if you want to get expedited build process and everything else, you can get them in 2 to 3 business days, or build time and then next business day. So just to clarify, that is build time. They are built within 5 business days and then they will ship. So, depending on where you're at in the country, they'll get there pretty fast. Like, really, if you order them on a Monday, you should have them by potentially, early next week. So that's fast. That's huge, because these are custom. These aren't just batched arrows. These are built, tailored for you, for your setup. This isn't just slapping together an arrow and calling custom.
Yeah, there's a lot more that goes into that. Even beyond other custom arrow solutions, there are a few or several added steps that add some complexity to our build process, in which I'm sure we'll get into some of that.
Yeah, for sure. But overall, it's about as easy as it gets, because that's what we wanted to do, because we understand there's a pain point, man. Like, no one wants to go out and shoot crappy arrows, or no one wants to go, they got this brand new bow, they're so excited, oh my gosh, I can't wait to go hunting this season. They shoot an arrow like, oh, that flew like crap. This one flew like crap.
Those are the struggles that I went through last year from shooting an 80-pound bow, which I had less than stellar experiences with my arrows, and at the time, not understanding arrow characteristics, flight characteristics, it threw me for a whirlwind. Like, I thought I had bow problems. I didn't have bow problems. I had spine problems. So becoming more educated on this process, diving down these wormholes and spending literally hours every single day for 10 months trying to learn as much as I can, it gets to a point where there is no major return for gaining this knowledge, other than if you can communicate it to other folks, you're saving them time. So, like, for people that want to dive down the wormholes, that's awesome. But I'm telling you, there's not a tangible return in gaining that knowledge, other than you fully understand the process.
Yeah, in this process, you need to know a handful of things. You need to know your draw weight, you need to know your draw length, you need to know what point you're shooting, and you need to know if you have a preference on brass or aluminum, which is just a weight preference. So that's it. That's all you got to know.
And so the spine's on there. Explain a little bit about what that means, though, because we have a 300 and a 350. So explain just a little bit about what that might mean for people as they're going and shopping.
When you start talking about spine, there's a couple different things. You need to talk about static spine and then dynamic spine. Your static spine is basically those data points that you're entering, your point weight, your draw length, and your draw weight. Like, those are the things that are going to categorize you into a specific static spine, which is just the measurement of deflection in the arrow shaft. Again, like, some of the stuff gets a little more complicated. When you start looking at the dynamic spine, you're talking about how that arrow is reacting in flight once the work from your bow has been applied, which is a whole separate ball of worms. But from a consumer standpoint, on the arrow builder, like, you're looking at static spine based on what data inputs you're putting in, which is really, really important, because that's going to put you into either it is or it isn't going to put you in a spine that's suitable for your setup. So, like, that is the very basics. That is the very starting point. Like, you need to have your static spine selected correctly for your setup. Because if you're not, like myself, shooting an 80-pound bow, 30-inch draw, I was shooting 250 spine arrows last year. They were underspined. So being underspined, I had to play with point weight. I got down, like, I was forced to shoot a 75 grain broadhead because I was so far underspined. So I had to lower my front end weight to make those things fly, which wasn't really, there's not a whole lot of broadhead options at 75 grains. So I ended up shooting 100 grains, fletched the back ends, and just lived with it, which it worked out. But that's not, again, like you take out the variables, be consistent, and make sure that you have this stuff figured out before hunting season.
Absolutely. So, what spine is this thing? So that's another thing, like micro diameters, all the craze right now. What spine what spine is the MMT?
Diameter.
Sorry.
So the spine's offered in 350s and 300s, which a 350 spine, and again, we'll go through our build process and what we're doing there. Our process is a lot different than 95% of the other arrow manufacturers or the other world. So our arrows are going to react a little bit shorter when you're comparing them, like a 30-inch arrow to a 30-inch arrow. Our build's going to react like a 25-inch arrow or 26-inch arrow, not a 30-inch arrow. But we'll get into that. But diameter-wise, we're starting with a 246.
Why do we decide that?
Well, there's some science there behind rate of recovery, some material property items, which honestly gets pretty complicated. We need to do some more testing to visually show, because we could talk about this stuff, but people aren't interested in hearing subjective opinions. They need to see. Show me, not tell me. So we have some more content coming out based on why we chose to start with 246s and not 204s or 166s. And some of that relates to, again, our marketing approach and being transparent, no smoke and mirrors. When you start talking about arrow straightness, and different SKUs from different manufacturers, the production process, like there's a lot of stuff there that companies are charging people more money for that it isn't any different than a cheaper arrow.
And another on the diameter, another simple reason as to why is, number one, that's the standard shaft. 246 is the standard shaft. So component selecting and everything, that's going to be your baseline. That's your standard. So the build process is easier, and the shaft itself is just going to be a little bit easier to deal with.
Absolutely. Okay. So, and I think something, like how beyond, like trying to solve this issue of selling, tailoring an arrow for someone, the interesting thing is it's kind of you just mentioned, a misinformed or underinformed product category, similar to what trail cameras were during 2015, 2016. So what excites you about arrows in terms of educating people about archery and arrows in general?
Well, I think there's, when you start comparing it to the trail camera space back in 15 and 16, there are some similarities. There is information out there, but it's coming more from personalities than it is coming from brands. Easton does a great job. When you get in their blogs, they do a great job on educating people, but most of the information is coming more from personalities than it is manufacturers. So then when you start getting into specifics around, what someone is shooting, like as far as a bow setup, what their shot execution, what that process looks like, that changes with everybody. So something that works for, X personality, Y personality is probably doing something a little bit different. And when you pick up X or pick up Y and shoot what they're doing, like it's probably going to be a little bit different for you even. So educating from a brand standpoint and allowing people to know, like, hey, these are the nuances, these are the variables, I think that plays a bigger part of individual success than taking, advice from whether it's replicating what I'm doing or replicating what anyone else is doing.
So you're saying I shouldn't try to have the same arrow as a guy shooting trad?
That's exactly what I'm saying.
Because it works
That's
good
exactly
for him.
what I'm
If
saying.
it works good for a trad bow, then man, it's got to be great for a compound.
Right.
That's not right. Just for anyone that didn't pick the sarcasm up. So yeah, I think that's a really good point. And I think that should just be a fun thing to dive into more depth. But any other, I guess, pieces of misinformation that we need to address? I know you mentioned like the straightness example briefly in the production of that. But what about, is there a point where diving into this topic, it's almost a level of diminishing returns? Like you're splitting hairs of overcomplicating this process, and this is kind of just trying to simplify it?
Yeah, 100%. I think if anyone is listening to this podcast and they've tuned into the Deer Gear podcast that Cameron hosts and has listened to an episode with Dorge Talk, I think that is overcomplicating the process. Like when he's talking about performance gains, performance differences. Like he is counting the 0.5%. Like I can get a 0.5% better by doing X. I can get a 0.5% faster by, or more 0.5% more velocity by doing Y. And like you would do all these things to the extremes, and maybe in total your performance is 2% better than what it was before, but you spent, I don't know, $1,000 on all these different accessories or bolt kits and yada, yada, yada. And at the end of the day, you're 2% better. Is 2% going to make the difference on a shot on a whitetail? Maybe, maybe not. I mean, let's face it, we're shooting these things under 30 yards most of the time. Not super tough hides. We all have, I guess, those horror stories of that one errant shot or bad shot. But the long and short of it is, like, the further you get down this wormhole, the less return you're going to have.
So we're saving everyone the process of having to do that, basically.
Yes.
We've been there. We've done.
Yeah, we did it.
Yeah.
You're welcome.
It's frustrating. It is frustrating to some degree, yes.
Yeah, picture someone standing in a whiteboard, like point A to point B. And then the other one was like still getting back to the same spot. But by golly, you learned everything along the way off the direct path. So let's talk a little bit about some more problems that, the MMT is really trying, at least solving. So right now, a lot of attention, heavy arrows, high FOC. What does that mean in coordination of these arrows?
Well, we're kind of going the other direction. Like when you start looking at the trend of high FOC, like these builds are somewhere between kind of 8 and 12% is kind of standard. Now you can change that a little bit with your broadhead weight. You just have to account for that, up front when on a static spine. The heavier point weight you're using, the more deflection you're going to have in that arrow. But I think everybody's concerned about momentum or penetration, and mass favors penetration. Momentum favors mass. Excuse me, I misspoke there. Penetration favors mass. When you start looking at kinetic energy and momentum in those calculations, velocity, kinetic energy favors velocity, momentum favors mass. So when you start going down these wormholes with kind of what Troy Fowler is talking about, the ranch fairy, when he starts talking about this stuff, his process isn't that much different than what we're preaching or the way we're tackling things. We're both changing the dynamic spine of the shaft to get it to fly. Like whatever flies out of your bow, that's what you need to shoot, right? But we're trying to do that, or we are doing that without losing velocity. The other way around is you change point weight, you change the dynamic spine, you settle your arrow down, but you're doing that by losing velocity. Now are you gaining momentum? Yes, you are gaining some momentum because you're adding mass, but you're losing velocity. The key there is, at what point do you have enough momentum, enough kinetic energy to pass through anything in North America, right? And that number, or that metric, like if you start looking at momentum, it's somewhere around 48 slug feet. Like that's the unit of measurement when you start talking about momentum. That's enough momentum to pass through anything in North America. And if you can get there with better trajectory because you have better velocity, like if you're going above and beyond that 48 slug feet, like you're hurting yourself. You're losing velocity. So those are the things to think about. How do you have enough momentum, enough kinetic energy to kill whatever you're hunting with having the best flight characteristics? And in our opinion, it's not doing that. Slowing your arrow down isn't giving you that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think to help illustrate that too would be that Realtree calculator. There's on their website to go in and calculate that stuff too. Like if you're curious what that looks like and going in and tinkering with arrow weight and arrow speed and what that looks like. I know you messed around with that tool. Anything you want to add to that?
No, there's a couple good ones out there on the web. That is one good one.
Mm-hmm. And so you can, change all those inputs and see what it says. So we kind of mentioned, obviously, taking out the guesswork, we're taking that out. Like, so you just tell us what you have and we're going to build you the best arrow possible for you and save you from getting the giant headache trying to learn all this and getting more confused along the process. The other thing too is talk a little bit about the patent shaft design and how it has improved safety.
Yeah. So the shaft itself is it's a carbon weave shaft. It's not a molded shaft. And then the weave pattern is a 1-to-1 ratio, where a lot of manufacturers, a lot of shafts are a 1-to-2. So what that does is it gives us more even strength. Like when you start looking at a circle or a shaft 360 degrees, it gives us better strength in torsion when that arrow is twisting and doing funky things once it's in flight. It gives us better strength in tension and also in compression. So there's less deformity around that circle. Like if you were to take a circle, imagine like a balloon, and you're poking your finger and that balloon is kind of deforming in different ways. Like we have less of that because of the patented shaft design. But it comes into the safety realm when you think about shaft failures. And like Cameron had a really, really close experience with that this spring when we were doing product testing and doing different things with our bows, getting these things set up and starting to shoot. But because of the weave design, because of that ratio, these shafts tend to fracture and not splinter, which if you've ever seen that viral photo on social of some guy with a splintered arrow shaft completely through his hand or through his forearm, like that dude's picking thousands or tens of thousands of splinters out of his hand, which is nearly impossible. I'm not saying this shaft's not going to run through your hand if you have a failure, but it's not going to splinter the way a lot of other shafts do. And Cameron, you could probably talk on that a little bit.
Yeah, I just had a freak accident happen where I had too much torque on my string, let it down, the bow blew up, the arrow shot, the arrow came in contact with my sight housing, and that particular arrow in the 2 points of contact with the sight housing, the arrow just snapped clean, breaks right over that, and as opposed to splintering and going everywhere and shooting shards of carbon through me or through the bow tech that was standing there. So it was 2 clean breaks right where that fracture happened, and I just took the arrow, threw it away, and I lived to shoot another arrow. So in a scenario where that may not be what you encounter, but if you have an arrow, you shoot it into the ground, you shoot it into a rock, and it has a little bit of a fracture or break in it already, and you shoot it, that arrow is not going to just go into a million pieces. It's just going to break cleanly and go its separate ways, and you don't have to worry about all the negative side effects of having splintered carbon throughout your body.
Obviously, the safety thing's huge. That's very important. And it's not important until it is. And obviously, if something goes south, like to lose the function of your hand is really scary. But beyond the safety aspects of the shaft, what are some of the high-end components that we're using? Because I think that's something that really sets this arrow apart as well. Or not just throwing these things together with cheap components.
Yeah, I think when you start looking at custom build solutions, everybody thinks visual, right? Everybody thinks about like a certain color palette. They think about a certain wrap or having a cool design or like a cool logo or like something of that nature. Like that is not the approach that we are taking. Like if the component itself doesn't have some type of performance benefit, like we're not going to use it. That's just the approach that we're taking. So you will not see arrow wraps on our shafts, like underneath the vanes, and there's reasons for that. And there's probably an argument there from somebody saying, well, if I have a white wrap on my arrow, it is gonna help me from a performance standpoint because I'm gonna be able to see blood better. I'm gonna be able to tell where the shot placement was. So what's our argument to that, Jake?
We got white fletchings on there as well.
And a white water transfer pattern. Like there's 5 inches of white plus your vanes for that specific reason. So when you look at the branding of the arrow, there's not again, going back to if it has performance capabilities or an increase of performance, it needs to have a purpose, is what I'm trying to say. If the component doesn't have a purpose, then we're not using it. That's why the water transfer pattern is white. That's why we're using white vanes. Like there's a purpose behind that kind of kills 2 birds with 1 stone.
And if your vane flies off because you have wraps on your arrows, you're not going to see the blood anyway.
That's exactly it.
For sure. And are you saying these arrows are ugly? I think they look pretty awesome.
I'm not saying they're ugly. I'm saying they are timeless because there's not some gaudy wrap on them or some gaudy, water transfer pattern saying they're zombie decapitators or whatever you want to call them. And we all know like exactly what I'm talking about.
For sure. Yep. So that's really important. Obviously, this is all the components are no nonsense. So let's talk a little bit about beyond the. We'll talk about the fletchings. So why did we pick what we did, and what do they do different?
Yeah. So we sourced. Obviously, we have a relationship with George at Fire Knock. I've shot Arrow Vane 2 for on and off for several years. The downside is that they are a little bit pricey, but that's what we're using because that's what we believe is the best. Now, there's science behind that. When you start looking at the stabilization and how that arrow comes into equilibrium, when you have like a bare shaft tuned arrow and there's a flaw in that shaft, so maybe you have a little bit of an errant flight, the tail of that arrow is impacting left or right of your point. Most of the times when you fletch that, the arrow straightens out. And it does that because of friction or drag. You're straightening that out because you're introducing friction into that equation. With friction or with drag, you lose velocity. Again, going back to MMT, essentially, yeah. So you're looking at the back of that profile of that back end moving around, and you're minimizing that. So, but the reason, that's the general job of fletchings or of vanes, is to stabilize the back end of the arrow. But you're doing that through friction with most vanes. Arrow Vane 2 doesn't do that. It uses lift, and the way it's designed is it creates an unbalance between upward and downward pressure as the arrow is rotating through the air to help make the revolutions per minute increase. So the faster it spins, it's like a bullet. Think of about a bullet that tumbles versus a bullet that spins. Which one has better flight characteristics? The bullet that spins faster. So we're taking the same approach. We're trying to get a faster rate of revolutions without introducing a bunch of friction. And what that kind of equates is this, again, watch the verbiage here. Better accuracy through better groupings at distance, less drag, less velocity deprivation.
Huge. Really important.
It's very important.
I think fletchings are probably overlooked with a lot of things. Like, I think some people just pick them by a whim. Same thing. They look cool. Like, I don't think most people think about the science of why this is the best fletching. Like, this is part of the components. How does it make the arrow shaft better? How does it help me become a better shot in the moment of truth? See what I did there? Have the best performance. So, as you're going through that builder too on the website, are we providing any sort of lighted Nocks for people if they would like to?
Yeah, there's a bunch of different knock options, and I think this is something that I've been guilty of overlooking before I became educated on this, in this product category. But when you think about the knock, right, the knock of the arrow, like most people, like if it fits on your string and it comes off, people are good with it, right? But when you think about the knock being the actual point of transfer of work from your bowstring to your shaft, to your actual arrow, like the better those tolerances are, the better your arrow is going to be off.
More consistent.
The more consistency. Like if you have a knock that's fitting on your center serving, and that string is vibrating back and forth, hitting left, hitting right, hitting left, hitting right, and then it hits the throat of the knock. Like, think about what that does. So there's a bunch of different knock options on there. We have fire knock, which are specifically for 108 to 112 thousandths on your center serving. Most guys are like, I don't know what my center serving is. I've been there.
I don't think anyone knows.
Most people don't know. But for that specific reason, we also offer another high-quality knock from Boning, the Boning Blazer knock, that fits most, I guess, default strings from a bow manufacturer. So it's a double-click knock that has a wider throat that'll fit up to 120 thousandths center serving. And then, in addition to that, we also have lighted knocks. Now, I've talked about lighted knocks on the deer or on Gear Gadget. I've shot. Again, I don't want to bash anybody here, but I've shot Nocturnal, I've shot Luminock, I've played around with Glory Knock, and I've shot Fire Knock. Fire Knock is the only lighted knock, personally, that I have ever used that works every single time the way it's supposed to. They don't turn on when you're knocking your arrow up in your tree stand, and you have this glowing blue or glowing green thing up there at dawn or dusk. Like, that doesn't happen. And when you shoot the dang things, they go off. And to turn them off, you just turn them vertical and drop them. You don't have to dig out your pocket knife or try to use your thumbnail or whatever else to get the things turned off.
Damage the knock with your knife.
Yeah, I mean, there's a gamut of scenarios there. So running through the knock stuff, if you're not shooting a lighted knock, again, I've talked about this. Because I had so many problems with lighted knocks, Nocturnals, the Glory Knocks, all those other lighted knock options, I just went back to a white plain knock because that is what showed up on camera best. that is what I could see the flight, like after I shot an arrow, like in the timber, that's what I could see best. So the boning blazer knock is white for those folks who have those same concerns.
Yeah, super important. Well, I mean, when you put it as once again, a knock, another thing that is often just overlooked, like, oh, well, I got green string bump, like everyone is trying to like color match their thing and not thinking about the actual components of how important the knock is in terms of your serving string. So that's so how would someone figure out if they should get the S-Fire knock as well to know if they're in those parameters? What's the best way to figure that out?
As far as like center serving, I think you can get a mic and just measure it if you have a mic laying around. If not, like just contact your bow manufacturer to see what the default string is, or if you have custom strings, you can order them to any size you want. So if you're ordering custom strings, like know that up front. But if you don't, like just contact your manufacturer, they'll tell you.
For sure. Very important. How would you say that's extremely important before you press order?
Yeah, that is.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. It's not a thing that's like going to totally trash the build, because you can buy third-party knocks and just pull. I mean, they're just insert knocks, so you pull them out and install a new knock. Unless you have the lighted option. If you're going the lighted option, like it is important that your serving size is correct, because what happens if it's too tight, your shaft is going to end up leaving after the shot and your knock's going to stay on your arrow. Or you'll have pinch, like at full draw, your arrow is going to lift up off your rest.
Yeah. Anything else on the knocks?
I think that, unless you have anything, Cameron, that covers the back end.
Yeah, that's it.
Okay. What about the CTI on the front end? Let's talk about that. Another pretty exciting thing. So we'll talk about the inner tube of the arrow. Yeah,
so this is different. This is going to be foreign for a lot of people. I think most custom built arrows, like you're buying a shaft with wraps, fletching, some type of insert or outsert, and knock. Like there's nothing going on the inside of the actual carbon shaft itself. We're taking a different approach to that because of some performance increases. So in our builds, we're actually putting a 6-inch inner carbon tube or inner carbon shaft in the front of these arrows, and they weigh about anywhere from 30 to 32 grains in total on the front end of the shaft. So there's a couple reasons for that. One is it changes how your arrow reacts after the shot. Like I mentioned that these things, in my example, I'm shooting a 30-inch arrow, but they're reacting like a 25-inch arrow, meaning they're recovering faster. That's possible because that shaft itself is elongating the front node on your arrow shaft.
And Cameron has a really good example of explaining that in a arts and crafts version. Get out your pen and pencil. Yeah. Go out to the sidewalk and get a chalk.
Yeah, you can walk outside with your daughter, your son, and draw this on the sidewalk. But if you picture your arrow shaft as a goldfish or a tuna fish or a fat fish, that tail end of it is your broadhead. The mouth of the fish is your field point, or your veins. The mouth is the veins, and the knock. The point at which the wavelengths cross for the tail is the node of your arrow, or the point at which all the work and all the vibration. Yep, all the vibration and everything is minimized. So that's the spot on the arrow where there's minimal movement. And what adding that 6-inch carbon tube to the arrow does is takes that fat tuna fish or goldfish and turns it into a walleye. So those wavelengths are shortened. The node is elongated. It's more consistent. It's more forgiving, and it's more efficient.
Yeah, so efficient downrange, meaning it comes into equilibrium faster. You're losing less velocity.
That seems like a lot. Like making your arrow perform 5 inches less.
It is. Yeah, it is a lot. And when you start getting into specifics about the performance, it does get pretty darn complicated. There's a lot of variables in there. But those results, as far as reacting 5 inches shorter, basically, or 4.8 inches shorter, I think is the actual number. It's 60% of the effective length of that 6-inch carbon tube is what it's changing. That has been pretty consistent.
Interesting. Anything else to add on that?
Well, I mean, there's some stuff that goes into the craftsmanship of those builds, but essentially that inner carbon tube is applied. So your actual insert of your shaft. So we have 6061 T6 aluminum insert that's 19 grains, I believe. And then we have a brass insert that's 30 grains. And that inner carbon tube, your insert's going to go into that inner carbon tube, and then that gets assembled as one unit inside of your 246 shaft. So the front of that shaft is there's several components there, all kind of combining into one.
Another benefit to that CTI outside of quicker recovery times on your arrow is the structural integrity of the arrow.
100%. That's a good point.
And it does it by not necessarily thickening the wall, because having a thicker wall shaft is something we wanted to stay away from for this. It adds another layer of carbon in underneath the front 6 inches of your arrow, which every time you shoot a deer, the front 6 inches of your arrow is most likely going to come in contact with the deer. So the structural integrity of the arrow is stronger up front. It's reinforced.
And so you touched a little bit about the craftsmanship of these arrows. So you're saying we're just not slapping these things together on a factory line?
No, I think this is really, really, really important. I mean, Cameron, I don't know if we mentioned this previously, but you had a pretty poor experience with a custom solution or custom builder last year.
Yeah, it's 2 years ago. And because of the issues that I went through, so I used a custom arrow solution, and they were custom made arrows for me. I shot a few deer with those arrows, and they killed the deer, but every arrow, I shot 5 deer with those arrows, and 3 of the 5 arrows broke in the very same exact spot. I did not come in contact with any bone. I thought maybe I had. I shot right in that deadly V, like perfect shot placement, and my broadheads perform extremely well. It's not a broadhead issue. Every arrow, or 3 of the 5 arrows, broke in the very same exact spot. Those are the same arrows that took 2.5 months to get to me. So those arrows weren't necessarily built correctly for what I was shooting. They're like, oh, it's been 2.5 months. We need to get him an arrow. Because of the frustrations that I went through from that waiting 2.5 months, when I needed replacement arrows, I just ordered the same thing again. And I got the same results because the arrows weren't made specifically for me carefully. They were just thrown together and this will work for you. Go ahead. So let me just give you a short example on specs. 27.5 inch draw. I was shooting 65 pounds and I wanted to shoot like a 14 to 15% high FOC arrow. What would the spine be on our spine chart?
350.
I was shooting a 250 spined arrow for the last 2 years, which is what you shoot out of an 80-pound bow with 30-inch draw length. Like, it's about as stiff as it gets. And they had me in that at a 65-pound bow and a 27.5-inch draw length. So that's just kind of the craftsmanship, the thought behind what's going on, and how we're tailoring things to you.
Yeah. I mean, on the craftsmanship side, there's some added steps that we're doing to make the builds consistent. One of them is we are weighing and sorting components down to 2/10 or a fifth of a grain, basically. So part of that comes with building a dozen arrows and using a 6-inch carbon inner tube on the front end. So if we go build a dozen of these arrows, and we're just grabbing CTIs from out of a bag, out of a box, out of a pile, and if there's 1 or 2 grains difference there, by the time you get those builds, you might have 5 or 6 different arrows that, a grain here, a grain there. All of a sudden, they're 5 or 6 grains difference without even putting a broadhead or a field point on them. So weighing everything up front gives us the ability to be within just 1 or 2 grains of the total build, which I think is a really important point to give people a total arrow weight consistency that is at an elite level.
Yeah. Well, how many of us have, by a dozen, they get like 2 or 3 arrows that just suck? Like they're always just like 2 inches to the right, 2 inches to the right, 2 inches to the right every time. And then you get rid of those 2. And then you're sighting in your HHA 1-pin sight outside and there's a slight breeze and you lose 2 more arrows. So now you're down to like, of the dozen, you're already down to like 8 effective arrows. And then you got 6 in your quiver and you have 2 spare arrows for 5. Right. Eliminates that as well. Like the arrows we get are all going to behave.
Yeah, and I'm not saying like if your arrow, your broadhead or whatever, like if there's a couple grain difference, like is it the end of the world? No, again, but it goes back to taking those variables out of the thought process. Like if if you can control something, control it. And this is something we can control up front, a lot like, our quality control process on the trail cameras. If we can control it, we're going to control it.
For sure. So what about, are we spining these before? Are we checking what are we doing on before we even put fletchings on?
Yep. So after you build the front ends, so you have to build the front ends first before we can spine index, because after you insert that inner carbon tube, you're essentially changing the dynamic spine of that shaft, right? So when we're building the front ends of these shafts, everything's getting washed, everything's getting a bath in acetone. It gets built with high-end epoxy, and then we're allowing them 24 hours to cure vertically to have proper adhesion and consistent adhesion with that adhesive inside the shaft. So all the way around 360 degrees, you have an even distribution of that epoxy, leading to a better build. So we're not laying them down on their side where everything's, gravity's taking effect. Everything's getting washed, premium adhesives, and they're given 24 hours for that to set up and cure before we go and build the back ends. Once the front ends are built, every single shaft gets spine indexed, or we mark the first dynamic bend. So when you look at a shaft, there's a couple different bends or spines in a shaft. Now this is different than the static spine. This is what I guess the dynamic spine. But basically we're indexing them so the weakest portion of that spine is facing up. So when you look at the dynamic shaft of an arrow, you're going to have a strong side, you're going to have a secondary strong point, and then you're going to have a weak point. That weak point is consistent. That's where that arrow flexes. So we want that up, and that's where our cock vein is going. Now, there's other ways to accomplish that, right? Like when you start bare shaft tuning, and you start playing with knock placement, and you start turning your knocks, shoot a shaft, see what it does, see how it flies, turn your knock an eighth of a turn, shoot it again, turn another eighth of a turn, and you're trying to find that spot where your knock's aligned with the dynamic spine, or that first dynamic bend, the spine index, for that arrow to fly properly. That takes a lot of freaking time. I've been there. I went down that wormhole last year. It can be frustrating. We can control that. So we're doing the work for you up front. Like, take that out of the equation. Now, you may have to play with that just a little bit, maybe a 16th here, 16th there, to kind of really dial it in. But I guarantee you, out of the box, you're going to shoot better groups with these arrows than you were anything else like that came from the factory.
Yeah, that's huge. I mean, that is very important. Out of the box, they're built different. They're like, that's a phrase in today's society. Like, that old boy is built different. These arrows are built different, in the same tone and dialect. So, what about the manufacturing process in terms of one end being tapered? Does that occur with our arrows?
Nope. So we have consistent inner and outer diameter all the way through the entire arrow shaft, because we're using a ceramic mandrel, which is heated and then cooled before it's pulled. So the typical process, I believe, is using aluminum. Is that correct, Cameron? Aluminum mandrel, and those things are ripped out when the arrow or the carbon is still not fully cured, and it gives you a tapered shaft. So that's not the case with what we have going on. We have a consistent diameter, both inner and outer, on both ends of the arrow. For
sure. I'm excited to use these this year. I tell you what, I've used some of these arrow shafts in the past. And honestly, the 246 has been kind of the safety net every year. Usually come October, I'm digging through all my stuff. Like, oh, here's some. And then you end up using those a lot of times too. So, and there's a variety of reasons, but how pumped are you to shoot a big old buck with the MMT?
I'm excited, man. I'm excited just to finally be able to talk about this stuff and not have it behind closed doors. And like, we've been shipping arrows to partners for the last couple weeks now, letting them shoot them, seeing what they think. Like this morning, we got a picture from Aaron Hepler, like just shooting, I mean, I don't know, 1-inch groups. And I don't know what distance he was shooting at, but he was like, the first 3 arrows out of the box were touching each other. So it's just cool to see an impact, I guess, with the people that have had these things in their hands for a little while now. And I don't know how much cooler it gets when you can say that, you know, you're tracking down a deer with your scouting and your trail cameras, and then you also kill them with your arrow. Like that's pretty cool.
I'm ready for a bright red film over the logo. I mean, that's all I have to say. Cameron, how excited are you to use these?
Man, I'm super excited. I think everything's kind of coming together. I think collectively in the office, I've probably shot them the most, played with them the most, and built a bunch of them. And my I'm shooting. I have 2 bows now, and I'm shooting right now. I'm shooting my triax, and I shot one arrow at 20 yards. I just got my bow back. Shot one arrow at 20 yards. Moved back to 30 yards and beat the knock off that arrow at 20 yards. So these things are consistent, man. It is exciting in a year where I'm potentially going to draw Iowa, going back to North Dakota, and I have like a chance to put these things to the test, like actually really hammer it home. And I'm really excited for it. It's a product that we've been working on for a long time. It's cool to see it come to light.
And I think it's going to be cool for consumers too, and just viewers and folks, consuming our content. Like, there's a lot of people that love the content that, don't dive down or purchase trail cameras because we are on the upper end of a price point. Like, the guys, a lot of public land guys are running, task cams or not task cams, but Tascos because they're $50 or wild games or, whatever their reason is. Well, now we have another product category that if you relate to the brand, if you're consuming our content and we're providing some value, there's another opportunity to help us achieve our objectives of helping people.
Don't think you're doing us a favor. You're getting the best freaking arrow for whitetail hunting too.
Oh, absolutely.
Like, so not only do you get to support what we're doing, you also get like a extremely superior arrow shaft, tailored to you, built for you. So that definitely is very exciting. And hopefully everyone takes advantage of that, because I think, man, a lot of conversations, like you just said, at trade shows and everything else. Love what you guys do. Everything else. How many cameras do you run? 0. So where are these landing in terms of where are these landing in terms of price point? What can people expect to pay?
Well, I think the default price with like the boning Nocks and like your typical build time, I think is $239. Does that sound right? And then there's some added charges in there. If you want lighted Nocks, they're going to be more expensive. If you want overnight builds, it's going to be more expensive. But that base price is set at $239.
Really reasonable.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I like that custom experience that took me 2.5 months to get and broke every time I shot a deer was $280.
Yep.
Yeah. I remember I got some arrows fletched at an archery shop maybe last year. It might have been 2 years ago now. Had everything besides had the shafts. So I had to buy the fletchings, I had to buy the components, and then they had to put them together. It was like $150.
On the labor and components.
Yeah. And I was like, man. So you're getting, I guarantee these are going to be built with more TLC than what those were as well.
Yeah, the time that goes into this is substantial.
100%.
And so, when you look at that price point, I think it's extremely fair for what you're getting. So,
and there's still the option for like the half dozen purchases too. Like that price is set for a dozen. So
yep, half at $239. So what do you say? Should we give away a few of these? We haven't done a giveaway on here in forever.
I think we should.
So how many we want to give away? 5 dozen?
And we're gonna, that's fine. Let's do 5 dozen, but let's cut it up so 10 people. You want to do half dozens, or you just want to do full dozens?
I think you got to do a dozen.
Okay, we'll do 5 dozen.
5 dozen. And we'll do that across the Land Podcast, the Exodus Podcast, and the Deer Gear Podcast. So if you listen to those, you're going to hear the same pitch. But you got to leave a written review wherever you listen to this. You got to leave a written review. If you're watching this on YouTube, leave a comment, hit the subscribe and notification. It's a pretty easy way to get into get some fresh arrows for this upcoming season. And if you already left a written review, we really appreciate that. But you can go in and actually update that so you're fresh on top of the list. And it's June 15th. So any review after June 15th, we are going to throw your hat into their name of the hat.
And if you're feeling really froggy, we're going to have a pretty cool launch video. Give that a share.
Yeah, that'd be helpful too. So, and also too, if you have any questions or you're curious what your build may be, reach out to us. That's another thing too. Like if you have specific questions, we want to help educate everyone and make sure you're getting exactly what you need. So, anything else from you guys?
I don't think so, man. I'm just ready to get these things in people's hands. Just excited for the future here at Exodus.
All right, that's it. Appreciate it. If you guys have questions, reach out.